I think most of us, when we come to some of the changes that we've needed to make, are what we call sometimes double-minded.
Mm-hmm.
We have a part of us that wants to make the change and a part of us that doesn't. When it comes to addiction, for example, I think there's a part of every addict that wants to stop the addiction, and then there's another part of them that enjoys it, that has experienced it as a normal part of their life. They wouldn't know what to do without it. So there's a part of them that wants to stop, and there's another part of them that doesn't want to stop. I think every addict that I've ever known is what we call double-minded.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We're happy to bring to you another legacy podcast from the Men of Valor program featuring Dr. Mark Laaser and myself. We're going to do a podcast series that is based on the 3 spiritual questions. And this first podcast will feature Mark talking about question number 1, do you want to get well? These principles come from Mark's original book, Becoming a Man of Valor. Listen to Mark as he explains this first spiritual question, and I'm sure that you will benefit greatly from his teachings. Here now is Dr. Mark Laaser.
Let me just introduce the whole theme about what these questions are and why they're important. I believe that these questions are about an attitude. They're about our character. And if we are able to ask ourselves these questions and answer them, hopefully in a deeply spiritual way, they will lead us all into stronger character. Stronger character enables us to make healthier choices and healthier decisions over time. So, basically as a person who's, as most of the listeners know, recovering myself from, my own addiction, that these are questions that I learned to ask myself early on in the whole process. So, today, we're going to talk about spiritual question number 1, which I think is the cornerstone of the foundation of this character building that we're going to be after in terms of this show. So this question is, do you want to get well? And it's taken from a story in the 5th chapter of the Gospel of John where I'm not going to be able to get into an entire, explanation of that story, but it's a story of a healing pool in Jerusalem called Bethesda, and there's a large group of people that come to this pool. There's a tradition that there's a period of the day when an angel comes down, stirs the water. When the water is stirred, the first person to get into the well or get into the water will be healed of whatever affliction they have. And the Bible says that there's a guy that's been there for 38 years, and he's an invalid, and the Greek word that's used there means that he's not well in his body, he's not well in his soul, he's not well in his mind. Of all the people lying there, and Jesus comes across this scene, this is the guy that Jesus chooses to talk to. And Jesus asks this guy this simple question, do you want to get well? Now, when you think about it on the surface, if you're talking to a person who's has been sitting by a pool 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, you've been sitting by this pool for all of this time, why would you ask that person if he wants to get well? The answer that the guy gives is really very interesting, that I have no one to help me, and when I go down, someone else gets in my way. What I think the question and the response illustrates is that all of us, I think, get into trouble sometime with where we're at in terms of wanting to make the changes in our life that we need to make. I hear the words of Paul also in Romans chapter 7, verse 15, when he says, that there are times when there's good that I want to do that I don't do. There are times when there's evil that I don't want to do. That's what I do. And I think there are times when all of us face change. We want to make a change, for the better. We want to stop something that we're doing that's destructive. We want to start something that we think will be a positive change in our life, and we're having trouble doing that. And this first spiritual question is about that roadblock that we sometimes have in our brains. So, do you want to make a change? Do you want to get well, is the question asked. And so what I'd like the listeners to think about today is, where are you with any change that you think you're needing to make in your life in terms of willingness? I'm not just now talking about, because you can hear preachers talk about this all the time. This is a problem of the will. Well, I'm talking about willingness now, which is a problem of the will. But where are the roadblocks in your brain about this? I think most of us, when we come to some of the changes that we've needed to make, are what we call sometimes double-minded. Mm-hmm. We have a part of us that wants to make the change and a part of us that doesn't. When it comes to addiction, for example, I think there's a part of every addict that wants to stop the addiction, and then there's another part of them that enjoys it, that has experienced it as a normal part of their life. They wouldn't know what to do without it. So there's a part of them that wants to stop, and there's another part of them that doesn't want to stop. I think every addict that I've ever known is what we call double-minded. And that's part of what we're talking about here today. For all of you listening, do you recognize in yourself at times a double-mindedness? A part of you that wants to be free of something, and then another part of you that's not quite so sure. When it comes to some of the addictions, I was listening to the Oprah new interview show on her new network the other day. She was talking to Kelsey Grammer, the famous actor, the one who played Frasier for so many years. And he struggled with cocaine addiction and just recently got back from the Betty Ford Clinic, I guess. And he's now been free of it for over a year, gotten married, is really supposedly happy now. And when I was really interested in one of the things he said. He said, I really loved cocaine. He said, but this is the part that really fascinated me. I still love cocaine. Mm-hmm. I just know that I can't do it anymore. It's too destructive in my life, but I still love it. It was like a friend to me, he said. And that's kind of the attitude that I'm talking about in this broadcast for you listeners to think about. When you're thinking about making a change, there's a part of you that wants to do it. And is there not also maybe a part of you that's not quite so sure that you want to give up whatever it is, or you really want to start whatever it is you need to start?
That's why this first spiritual question is such a big one, because it really deals about, do you want to get well?
That's right. And by the way, I think that this is a daily question that we ask ourselves. The success that Alcoholics Anonymous taught me in the early years was you don't ask these major questions once and then you get well and you're free. You ask these questions, as AA would say, one day at a time. I think one of the mistakes that I see a lot of the Christian people that I work with make is that they think they can make a decision to get free of something or to start something. They can make it one time. They can go forward. They can kneel at the altar. They can do this or do that. And now they're free. Now they're changed. Now they're sometimes what we call delivered. And then the next day when they get up and some of the old attitudes have returned, they're kind of surprised. And maybe even they're angry at God. I think this is one of the big factors that might be part of this question is, like this guy who was talking to Jesus, he said, I've had no one to help me. A lot of the guys that I talk to, they are angry at God because they have prayed and prayed and prayed to be changed, and that change has not come, and there's a part of them that blames God for not changing them in the way that they want to be changed. I think all of us who kind of resist all of this stuff, we have to face into a disappointment at times that we've had with our spirituality or whatever else it is. I don't know. Does that make any sense to you, Randy?
Well, it does, and yet it leads me to the question. Last week, as you shared a brief version of your personal story, we established the fact that you are in your 26th year of sobriety, of recovery.
That's right.
And with that in mind, do you still find yourself asking yourself these key spiritual questions?
Absolutely. That's what I'm trying to say this morning. there's not a day goes by that I don't ask myself all three of these spiritual questions. And, by the way, that's an interesting thing, because after 25 years, people have been asking me, how did you do it? How were you successful? There must be some deep spiritual answer to this in terms of some spiritual practice that you put into place. Well, I think what I learned early on is that every day is a new day. Every day, we need to ask ourselves certain questions. And every day we need to recognize that all of us are vulnerable, and we need to put into place the safeguards that are going to keep us free of whatever behavior we're trying to change. And that's going to mean other people in our life helping us with that. But do I still ask myself the question? Yes. I mean, even though I've been free of sexual sin for all of those years, the truth of it is that I live in a highly sexualized culture. That's part of what we talked about earlier in the show, and that there are going to be temptations that bombard all of us on a daily basis. So I better be willing today to answer that question. Am I willing to be free of sexual sin today? Then the follow-up question is, if I am willing, what am I going to do today to safeguard that decision?
Is it safe to say then, as we wrap up today's show, that the question you'd like to leave our listeners with today is this first spiritual question?
Yes. Are you willing to make the change? Now, all of the people listening are going to have different changes that they need to make. It may be about stopping a sinful behavior. It may be about starting a more positive behavior. Whatever the case is, the question is, do you want to make that change? And secondarily, are you willing? So that's question one. But the question two is, are you willing to get help? I mean, if the truth was that you were able to make this change on your own, by yourself, in your own double-minded way, you probably would have done it after all these years. Would it not be the case that perhaps part of the reason you haven't made the change is because you haven't had help to make that change? You see, the programs are interconnected. If you've been able to share your secrets with somebody else, then you're going to have other people in your life who may be willing to help you make that change. I think that first question, do you want to get well, is kind of, like I said earlier, a cornerstone. But then we move on today to the second spiritual question. And the question itself is, what are you thirsty for in life? And it's taken from a story in the Gospel of John where Jesus, and really on this short radio show, I really don't have time to set up all the biblical context of this story, but in John chapter 4, there's a story of Jesus on his travels. He comes to a well in Samaria. It's interesting today, Randy, when some are saying on the brink of another Middle East war. There are those there right now as we're doing this broadcast that are trying to broker a peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And Secretary Clinton is over there, and the Prime Minister of Egypt is over there, and people are sending rockets in both directions, and it's a crazy time over there, as it has been for thousands of years. In Jesus' day, that conflict was still there. In fact, the land that we're talking about here, the Palestinian lands, is actually a land that lies between Jerusalem and the northern part of Israel called Galilee. And Jesus was well known in Galilee. That's where he had his primary friendships. His teaching activity to a large extent happened in Jerusalem, but there came a time when he wanted to go be with friends. It's kind of like tomorrow at Thanksgiving, many of us are going to make travels to try to be with family. And Jesus was traveling, of course, in those days by foot, and he had to go through this land that is so much in the news even today. What at that time was called Samaria, today Palestine. And in those days, Jews, like now, they weren't supposed to associate at all with Samaritans and or Palestinians today. And but Jesus nevertheless decides to travel through this land. And he comes to a well. It's a very famous well. Again, I don't have time to kind of explain all of that. It's the well that was given by Jacob to his son Joseph. And Jesus is reported in the story by John to be tired. He sits down at the well. It's basically noon. The well is a mile south of the city, and it's not a well that is frequented by people, because if you gather water for your family and you get it in a gallon bucket type situation, you're going to have to carry it a mile back to the city. And no one would gather water at noon. It's too hot. So you know that anybody who's going to be at this well is probably going to be some level of an outcast or shunned at the respectable, more convenient wells in the city that is close by. So Jesus is sitting there, and there's a woman that comes, and she has been married 5 times, according to Jesus. He's currently living with a 6th guy. So, in those days, this is about as bad as it gets. John is painting a picture of the worst of all outcasts. She's a Samaritan, that's bad. She's a woman. In those days, a Jewish man was not supposed to talk to a woman in public. Your mother, you couldn't talk to in public. Your daughters, your wife, your sisters, you couldn't talk to any women in public. So this woman comes. She's a Samaritan, don't talk to her. She's a woman, don't talk to her. And then she's been divorced 5 times, which in that culture is like unheard of. I mean, to be divorced once, your husband had the legal authority to have you stoned. This, however, is a person that Jesus is going to choose to talk to, and he's illustrating to all of us that Jesus and the message that he brings and the fact that he is the Messiah is a message that's for everybody, the respectable people and the outcasts. In the course of the conversation that they have, the woman notices that Jesus looks thirsty. He doesn't have anything to draw water with. She asks him about that, and Jesus says to her, "Truly I say to you that anyone who drinks of the water of this well will be thirsty again. But anyone who drinks of the living water that I have to offer will never thirst." So the question that comes out of this, I think, is that second spiritual question. In our lives, what are we thirsty for?
Well, Mark, don't most of us, at one time or another, we've tried to quench our spiritual thirst in physical and emotional ways that actually can never be satisfied?
Well, that's right. I was thinking about it today. One of the themes of our show is current cultural conditions, current things that we're up against. And on the day before Thanksgiving, evidently, there was a piece on the news last night that with Black Friday now actually starting on Thursday, there are people that have been lined up anticipating the sale of certain items at certain retailers. I won't name any of them, but there's people that are pitching tents. There are people that are lining up for days just to get a 25% or maybe 50% discount on a certain hot ticket item. Electronics are obviously always big. And I would confess, Randy, too, that, when I was listening to these reports, there's a part of me that thinks that maybe the next vintage TV or the next, I guess the tablets are going to be the number one seller electronic item this Christmas, according to the experts. And there's a part of me that thinks, well, maybe I need to go out and get whatever the newest iteration of these things are. And I can get pretty locked and loaded if I go to some of the electronic stores. And, I can basically think that the next hot electronic item could be something that would satisfy my thirst for excitement or for various stimulation in my life. And I certainly wouldn't want to miss out on being connected to the world in the ways that some of these electronics are capable of doing. So I just think in this season of Christmas, as we're moving into it, I think this whole question of what are we thirsty for is a really important one, because if we're thirsty for the next gift or the best possible item to possibly buy, that's a very dangerous place to be.
Well, does this lead us to individually be searching our heart to see what our personal desires are? Is that where this is leading us?
Well, that's right. I think that after the break we'll talk a little bit about desires. In this part of the question that we're posing to the listeners today, I'd like for them to think about, I mentioned electronics, but, there's so many other things in life that we can use to cope. If we feel at some level of our spirit that our basic desires for certain things are not getting met, since we're children, I think we learn how to cope in certain ways. One of the reasons that I think electronics are important to me is because when I was a kid growing up, the television set was the central part of my family. I was born in 1950. By 1952, the town where we were living had a TV station, and I remember my father, despite a minister's salary, rushing out to the electronics store and buying one of those first television sets. And we brought it into our living room like the entry of the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. And television became a central place in our family. One of the ways that I coped, there's ways to cope with food, ways to cope with spending, ways to cope with certain substances. One of the things that I'd like the listeners to think about in terms of this second spiritual question today is, if you're thirsty for something, what are some of the ways that you've used to cope? And certainly our ministry represents trying to help those that have sought to cope with the next sexual excitement, the next sexual high, the next sexual experience. And that's certainly also a way, which is why this story is so important. I mean, this woman had, 5 husbands and currently living with the 6th guy. One of her coping styles was evidently to be in another relationship.
Right.
I mean, the list of ways that we can possibly cope are in the hundreds. And a lot of us have probably a number of different ways that we cope, some of them relatively healthy, some of them totally unhealthy. So just trying to get the listeners to think about that. And then again, it goes back to the first spiritual question: what of those kind of coping things that you're doing would you like to change? One of the major features, though, of this question is what are you thirsty for, meaning what does your heart truly desire at a deeper level? When I think about this woman standing there at the well in the heat of the day, and she's about ready to carry her bucket of water, a mile in the hot sun, because the other women of the village where she lives are not accepting her because of her status. What do you think she was thirsty for? Well, don't you think she was thirsty for acceptance, to be included in fellowship with other women, to belong, not to be shunned, not to be rejected? I think there was that lonely part of her that was longing to be included.
And with these additional husbands of hers and the relationships she's had, she obviously had a burning desire to be chosen.
To be chosen. And she was chosen like 5 or 6 times here, but evidently none of those relationships were at a deeper, more intimate level. So I'm sure they weren't satisfying. Basically, in a way, we're talking about this book that Debbie and I wrote about the 7 desires of every heart. We don't have a lot of time today to get into all of those desires.
That deserves its own show.
And chances are we probably will do a show on all the desires. Let me just mention a few things that the listeners can be thinking about in relationship to those desires. I think one of the desires we all have is for people to listen to us, to understand us. Have you ever said to anybody, you don't get it, you're not listening? Do you ever repeat yourself, raise your voice, trying to get louder so that you can be heard? The second thing I think we all long for is affirmation, someone in our life to tell us, we did a good job, they're appreciative, thank you for what we did. One of the things that I think really is a primary dynamic that goes on during the holidays, particularly when we get around extended family, is the third desire that Debbie and I talk about, which is the desire to be blessed, which is the desire to be wanted, the desire to be affirmed, but not for what we've done, more about who we are as a person. That sense of we could screw up and still be okay in the minds of other people, that we are loved unconditionally, whether we're successful or unsuccessful, that there are people who just truly enjoy us. I think a lot of the men that I work with, they are still longing to hear the words from their own fathers that I'm proud of you, I'm glad you're my son, I celebrate the day that you came into our family. When you go be with your families over these holidays. Think about, that message and whether or not you've ever received it, heard it, or maybe at some point believed it. The fourth desire that we talk about is a desire to be safe, to be free of anxieties about our finances, our homes, our securities in life, and our relationships. I think we all have anxieties about people's presence in our life. Strangely enough, I think the fifth desire is really related to our field, and that is that we all have a desire to be touched in healthy ways, not just sexually, but to get a hug, a handshake, an arm around the shoulder. I think those are all things we desire. And then we've already mentioned the last two, the desires to be chosen and the desires to be included. We find that when we work with people, underneath most angers, most resentments, most arguments in life, one of these desires, if not several of them, are at work in the minds of people. And but what we're talking about today is, if you begin to understand your longing for all of these things, what false substitutes, have you found for them? If I long to be chosen or wanted or included, what kind of even sexual things can I, even when I'm perhaps, and I'm speaking to the listeners now, if you're thinking about what might you be looking for, even if you're looking at pornography on the internet, would it not at sometimes be just looking for people that you think might be willing, available, they really want you, they look at you through the pictures and they smile and stuff like that. So behind all of our pursuits that are false pursuits, false substitutes for getting our thirst met, one of these or more or several of these desires are operating.
Well, you reflecting back to the first program in which you shared a brief introduction to your personal story and your personal 25 years of recovery from sexual addiction, Mark. Mm-hmm. You talked about your first experiences, the first time that you saw that magazine and saw that centerfold, and she was looking into your eyes, and you felt several of those desires met. She was accepting you. Mm-hmm. She liked you. She had that look in her eye that told you she wanted you. So when men who are out there who are struggling with sexual purity, they turn to that kind of stimulus on an often because that's how they're having those needs met.
Yeah, that's right. And I was looking at a study that came across my inbox yesterday from some research scientist that said that 2/3 of all pornography websites are accessed, or 2/3 of the visits to pornography websites happen at work. We think that it's in the privacy of your own home, but we've got a whole lot of people that are out there looking at this kind of stuff, both men and women, I think, looking at this kind of stuff, using work time to do it. So I think about that in terms of this, what are you thirsty for? So you're at work, maybe you have some anxieties about how well work is going, maybe the stress and pressure of deadlines are upon you, maybe you're not getting along with some of your fellow workers, maybe you're not getting along well with your boss. Maybe your boss is not a very approving sort of guy. Maybe he's not giving you affirmations. Maybe you don't have that sense that you're unconditionally loved and accepted at your workplace. And maybe you've come from home and your wife has been grumpy that morning. The kids don't want to talk to you. Maybe there's just a lot of things in your life that aren't going that well. And it makes the temptation of looking for something that's friendlier, so to speak, friendlier in quotes, on the internet to get that excitement, that stimulation, those kinds of things. It makes a lot of us a whole lot more vulnerable when certain relationships in our life, including work relationships, aren't going all that well.
That example is the perfect way of showing how these 7 desires of the heart, they're not just your relationship with your wife. Mm-hmm. It's your relationship with your children, your friends, your boss, your coworkers.
Right. Yeah, all of those are important. All of those are a part of our community. And that goes back again to wanting to be included in an extended family. How many of us are not satisfied with the level of friendships that we have, the churches that we go to, and all of that? And by the way, in our work here at our center, we certainly see men and women that are coping in some terribly sinful ways, trying to get that longing that they have at their heart for broader community met in so many false substitutes. I always talk about the fact that over the years I've had the opportunity to work with some fairly famous people. I've known some people who have had sexual contact with thousands of partners, or that's what they claim anyway. And one of the guys in particular that I was talking to said, after all of that, it was never enough. And that brings us back to the words that we're talking about in the story with Jesus' conversation with this woman at the well. You can drink from the water of whatever well you're drinking from, whatever false substitute, and it will never be satisfying. It'll be a high for a few minutes, a few hours, but it always kind of leaves you unsatisfied, right, and wanting more. And I remember thinking when I was talking to this one very famous person at the end of the conversation after describing having sex with some of the most beautiful women in the world, he said it was never enough. I always wanted more. So basically what we know is that it's in relationship that our desires are satisfied, relationships with God, relationships with each other, and we have to be in search of the true answer to our deepest desires, which is that relationship with God.
As we wrap up today's show then, Mark, you've been leaving our listeners with a question each week, and I was just wondering, how do we want to leave our listeners this week as we enter Thanksgiving tomorrow with all we have to be thankful and mindful of? What thought did you want to leave them with today?
Well, I have one major question and a second question too, but the first question, and this is a tough one, but I would challenge the listeners to think about it this way. If you want to take Thanksgiving Day or any of the days over this long extended weekend, although maybe some of the people will be listening to this, much after Thanksgiving, take your average day and think about from the moment you get up in the morning to the moment you go to bed at night, what are some of the things you do to cope? Maybe when you get up, you're not feeling so great, and you the first thing you have to grab is that cup of coffee. Maybe you go out and have a smoke. Maybe you even early on during the day need to take that first drink. Those are some fairly major things, but I would just challenge the listeners to say, how on a given day are you coping? And one of the ways to look at that is, what are the things that you're doing, whether it's a substance or a behavior, to try to regulate your mood, to raise or lower your mood. You're feeling too excited and stressed, you need to bring it down. You're feeling too low, you need to bring it up. What are the things you're doing? And then the second question is related to this. This is a time of the year when we tend to make commitments to things, but I would like the listeners to think about, of any of the coping behaviors or substances that you recognize, which of them might you be willing to change?
Well, thank you for listening to podcast number 1 of the series on the 3 spiritual questions featuring Dr. Mark Laaser. We hope that you have enjoyed and benefited from these great teachings of Mark's, and we look forward to bringing question number 3 in the very near future. Until then, if you find yourself struggling with sexual addiction or sexual purity issues or pornography addiction, we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources and, more importantly, access to our Men's Journey workshop. There on the website, you'll learn all about the workshop and have the opportunity to register right online. We bring you the Men's Journey workshop every month, and we hope that if you're struggling with these issues, that you'll seriously consider attending one of our workshops. Until then, we hope that this has been a meaningful and beneficial podcast for you. And we hope that the coming week will be filled with many blessings and great vision.